All right, let's dive in. Today, we're going to talk about a real forgotten hero in the world of medicine. Long before penicillin became this famous miracle drug, there was another group of drugs that literally started the whole antibacterial age, and that's the sulfonamides. These were the OGs, the very first synthetic drugs ever made that could actually stop deadly bacterial infections in their tracks.
And this timeline, it really puts it all into perspective, right? So back in 1935, sulfonamides show up on the scene and just change everything. I mean, it was a total medical revolution. But then, just 7 years later, what happens? Penicillin gets mass-produced and it completely steals the show. The sulfa drugs kind of got pushed to the side. But as you're about to see, their story was far from over. They had a secret weapon that would bring them roaring back.
Okay, so here's what we've got on tap. We're going to start with how they first burst onto the scene. Then we'll get into the super clever way they work. After that, we'll check out their big comeback, look at a different kind of bacteria fighter, and wrap it all up with the really important stuff, what you need to know to use them safely. All right, section 1, the first bacteria fighters. So let's jump right in. And it's kind of wild to think about, but these life-saving drugs were actually first discovered in a derivative of coal tar. Yeah, coal tar. By 1935, these sulfonamides became the first ever synthetic drugs used to fight bacterial infections system-wide. We're talking everything from common UTIs all the way to deadly meningitis. Yep, and this quote right here, it just perfectly captures that moment in time. Penicillin it was so good, so celebrated, that these original, totally groundbreaking drugs almost got lost to history. But like I said, they had this really unique way of fighting bacteria, which meant their story was nowhere near done. Okay, so how do these things actually work their magic? It's not about just smashing the bacteria to bits. Nope. Instead, these drugs pull off this incredibly clever biological heist. They don't just kill the bacteria. Their method is, well, it's a lot more strategic than that. And here's the key idea. Sulfonamides are what we call bacteriostatic. So instead of killing the bacteria directly, they just stop them from making more of themselves. They stop them from reproducing. And what that does is it gives your own immune system a chance to catch up and clear out the infection that's basically been put on pause. Think of it less like a sledgehammer and more like a strategic shutdown. And this is where the genius of the drug really shines. See, bacteria, they're like these tiny self-sufficient factories. They have to make their own folic acid just to survive. It's what they use to build their DNA and proteins. But us, humans, we don't do that. We just get folic acid from the food we eat. Our cells don't have that factory. And that difference, well, that's the bullseye the drug is aiming for. Okay, so here's how the heist actually happens. The sulfa drug sneaks inside the bacterium, and it basically pretends to be a key ingredient that the bacteria needs for its folic acid assembly line. It just completely gums up the works, right? Blocks the whole production process. So now, without any new folic acid, the bacterium can't build new DNA, it can't make new proteins, it can't grow, it can't divide. The whole infection just grinds to a halt. And the best part? It does all this without even touching our human cells. But here's the thing. Bacteria are smart. They evolve, and over time, a lot of them developed resistance to this one-step attack. So, to make this forgotten hero a star again, scientists did something brilliant. They teamed it up with another drug, creating a combo that is way more powerful than either drug on its own. And that brings us to a huge question in modern medicine, right? Bacteria are constantly evolving, building up their defenses, and drugs that used to work great can suddenly become totally useless. So what do you do? What do you do when your one line of attack just isn't cutting it anymore? The answer? Well, it's actually pretty simple. Teamwork. Instead of just one angle of attack, you hit them with a synergistic combination. When you hit the bacteria's defenses from multiple sides at the same time, it becomes so much harder for them to survive, and even harder for them to develop resistance. And this right here is the absolute star of that comeback story, trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole. You'll usually hear it called TMP-SMZ. It's a total workhorse for things like UTIs, respiratory infections, you name it. But with that power comes some really important side effects you have to watch out for. There's photosensitivity. That means you can get a nasty sunburn super easily. Skin rashes are another big one. And then there's something called crystalluria, which is basically when crystals can form in your urine if you're not drinking enough water. The whole secret to its power comes down to this number, 2. Remember how the original sulfa drug blocked one step in that folic acid factory? Well, its partner, trimethoprim, blocks a second step further down the line. Hitting the bacteria in two places at once, that's the one-two punch that makes this combo so incredibly effective and makes it so much harder for resistance to develop. Okay, but starving bacteria isn't the only way to win this fight. Let's pivot and look at a whole different class of drugs that uses a completely different battle plan. You could say that if sulfonamides cut off the factory's supply line, these next drugs, they go straight for the CEO's office. We're talking about a class of drugs called nitroimidazoles, and the big name here is metronidazole. Their strategy is, well, it's a lot more direct. It's brutal, actually. They get activated once they're inside the bacteria, and then they literally start shredding the bacteria's DNA to pieces. As you can imagine, this causes catastrophic damage and leads to the bacteria's death. It's a full-on assault on the bacteria's core programming. And because it works this way, because it's so potent, it gets used for some really tough infections. It's a key player against anaerobic bacteria. Those are the ones that don't need oxygen. It's used for the infamous C. diff, and even for things that aren't bacteria at all, like protozoan parasites. So yeah, a very different tool for a very different set of jobs. Okay, now for what is maybe the most important part of this whole thing. All this science is cool, for sure, but what really matters is knowing how to use these powerful drugs safely and effectively. So this part is all about practical advice you can actually use. All right, so if you ever get a prescription for a sulfa drug like TNP-SMZ, there are a few rules you absolutely have to follow. First up, water. You need to drink a lot of water, over 2 liters a day, to keep those crystals from forming and causing trouble. Second, the sun is not your friend. You gotta use sunscreen, wear a hat, and just stay out of direct sun because your skin will be incredibly sensitive. And also, super important, if you see any kind of rash, bruising, or even just a sore throat, you need to call your doctor right away. Don't wait. Also, don't take it with antacids because they can mess with how it's absorbed. And it's a no-go during the last 3 months of pregnancy. Okay, now for metronidazole. There is one warning here that I cannot possibly stress enough. Absolutely no alcohol. And I mean 0. None while you're taking it, and none for at least a few days after you finish the course. Why? Because the combination can trigger this really awful reaction. We're talking flushing, a throbbing headache, terrible nausea, your heart racing. It's just miserable. You might get a harmless metallic taste in your mouth or maybe some discoloration of your tongue or urine, but that alcohol warning, that is deadly serious. And, the fight against these super tough bacteria doesn't stop there. For the really, really resistant ones, the superbugs like VRE, doctors have to pull out the big guns, these highly specialized drugs. One example is a drug called quinupristin-dalfopristin. It's really a last resort kind of thing, partly because it can have some nasty side effects itself, like phlebitis, which is this painful inflammation right at the IV site. Wow. So we've covered a lot of ground. We went from the very first synthetic antibiotics that cleverly starved bacteria to these powerful combos that outsmart resistance, and even to drugs that just go in and shred bacterial DNA. And to think, this all kicked off almost 100 years ago. And it really makes you wonder, right? As we stare down this future of growing antibiotic resistance, what lessons can the next generation of antibiotics learn from the amazing strategies of these original pioneers, from targeted disruption to powerful teamwork?